Hi, I'm Franklin SEO, author, consciousness researcher, meditation coach, and entrepreneur. But most importantly, today I'm your host on the road to Peak Meditation Experiences. This episode and the ones that follow in this series called Lighting the Way to Peak Meditation Experiences, and this is just part one, there will be several others. Is a continuation of the Dark Night of the Soul trilogy and its teachings. So what we're going to do here is explore peak meditation experiences. This episode and several that will follow are an examination of my personal peak meditation experiences, or PMEs for short, and I'll be using that term throughout this throughout today's talk. So some might call these visions, and we will shed light on what these higher states of consciousness look like and how they work. And it's pretty fascinating. Even I didn't understand them over the years that I was receiving them. It took me some time to step back, step away, and see the overall arcing storyline they were telling me. And then I realized just how important and how big they were. And this is what I'm really here to talk to you about through this series, and reveal to you that there's a teaching that we can, or these things are teachings, and they're experienced through our own practice. We can get here to the peak meditation experiences through really through self-inquiry, and there's a way to do that. But some of them can be vision types. There's multiple types. But there are also the types where we, over a period of time, bridge together facets of our own truths that we came to know through our meditations to discover a bigger truth for ourselves. And that is also a peak meditation experience. So these are well worth learning about, and I would highly recommend any serious meditator or anyone who's interested in discovering their own truths to join me. Okay, thanks for coming today. All right, here I want to remind you of the general definition of peak meditation experiences, or PME for short, and how they might be known by us. They can be held in or had in lucid dreams and other manifestations of consciousness, such as visions or a paranormal experience, or even in our normal meditations. And I've even experienced them in daydreams, so you never know when one might show up, especially if you've started intensifying your practice. If you've recently started spending more time per session, maybe you've moved from 30 minutes of meditation to 45 minutes a day, or something along those lines, you might discover that was just enough to raise your focus, your consciousness, and your new awareness level to a point where they couldn't show up for you. Epiphanies from understanding self-inquiry, as I mentioned before, is also another way to have a peak meditation experience. It's bridging together these truths that we know about ourselves, that we've discovered in our meditations, that knowing truth, not one that we come to in our mind by rationally thinking about it, but we know through introspection what that truth is. By stitching those together, that we can come to a much bigger truth about ourselves quite often. All of these have the potential to change our life or worldview and restructure our view of reality in both the physical conscious reality, PCR, and the non-physical conscious reality, or NCR. I'm going to talk about both of these, the PCR, physical conscious reality, and NCR, non-physical conscious reality, throughout this talk and the ones to come. So kind of get your mind around those terms. Now, both are worlds that we experience every day. Our physical waking state, PCR, is fed by the five senses that create our picture, that movie in the theater of our minds. We get, through taste, touch, hearing, smell, and so forth. A vision of the world comes into view for us. But the truth is, we don't see the world. It's all appears in our mind. In a sense, it's an illusion. We really don't know what's going on outside of these bodies. And the other part of that truth is, even if it was exactly as portrayed, we see such a small slice of it. Our hearing is just a fraction of all of the sound in the universe, on a decimal scale. In the same way with our sight, we only see a small fraction of the light spectrum. So how can we possibly know what total reality is? We just don't. Dreaming, deep sleep, daydreaming, meditation, and other forms of consciousness make up our non-physical conscious reality. So when the qualia from the five senses, or the signals from the five senses, stop, like in sleeping, or are turned off or bypassed, like we can do with our meditation, we're now in the NCR, the non-physical conscious reality. So we're beginning to connect to higher states of consciousness because we've shut off the input from those senses. Okay, I hope this makes sense to you because it's kind of foundational for what we're going to be exploring. Okay, PMEs appear for all kinds of different reasons, and I can only touch on a few of them here, but sometimes they appear in people who have stress or depression in their life and have hit a low point. Now, in my case, in the trilogy, I talk about my downturn, and I lost my connection completely. I couldn't meditate or do any of that, but they showed up in spades after my recovery, or after I turned the corner on that through the Vajrasattva cleansing that I talk about in the second part of the trilogy. So people can experience these, but one thing I can say about my PMEs is they changed in nature from the kind of PME I had prior to my downturn, and post downturn, they turned into a completely different thing. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about today, because there is a huge difference. And I want to expose that to you and help you understand it. So people who have near-death experiences report these as being what we would call a classic vision type, or archetypical type, or download of spiritual information. And there's several archetypes to these that you would be familiar with if somebody told you one. But seekers with a deep commitment, for example, to finding their truth, can experience these as well as ordinary people in the normal course of life. I've also had these experiences when I least expected them, and I mentioned earlier that I would kind of go into, I've had them in daydreams, but it happened to me several times along the way, where I would go into a daydream-like state, or again in the early stages of falling asleep in a dreamy but lucid mind state, without any intention of having an experience or trying to meditate or do anything. And I'd find myself observing some fascinating or riveting story that began to unfold in a surreal setting. By the way, they seemed quite normal during the experience. It wasn't as though they were out of place. It was something that seemed natural, And yet, when I look back at them and I would write them down and document them, um, I couldn't believe the depth and the breadth of their beauty and how awe-inspiring they were, but they didn't feel that way as they were transpiring. Okay, let's move on. Okay, I also want to kind of inform you about another way that we explore our minds in a deeper way, and that's in creative moments in our lives. When we're endeavoring to write that book, might be, or paint a picture, might be a little further out there, but or someone that would want to start a company by hatching a new idea in their mind, which I've had lots of experience with. These can be accompanied by creative visions or insights. And these are really first cousins to PMEs. We're beginning to access those higher regions of our minds, of our, not just our intellect, but of our awareness of things that are deep within us. So I've written a blog called The Dream Technique that you can find online here that you may want to watch or listen to if you are a creative type. By the way, it's not just for creative types. Whether you're a right brain or a left brain person, you can learn from this technique on how to program or induce these moments of creativity where you get past your own mind and fighting with the ego, by the way, for control of the mind so that you can create at a higher consciousness level. And then, as I explained in The Dark Night of the Soul, after the great downturn and the Vajrasattva cleansing, my meditation powers finally returned. In fact, they greatly increased in some ways, but they were different. So over the next several months and years, I had multiple PMEs, much more than I'd ever had before in my life. I mean, they were coming with some frequency. I had hundreds of them. That I would put into several different category types that we'll review, and I'm gonna summarize and put a handful of these out there for you to understand where I think they change spots. They go from informing us about one part of our mind to informing us about another, to informing us about another. So they're teachers. And again, I'll provide maybe 2 or 3 examples of these in each category, so that if you've had one, and many people have already had peak meditation experiences that they don't completely realize or don't understand. Others who've had them don't want to talk about them because they're afraid of the criticism from people who think, these kinds of things are woo-woo. We've got to get past that. These are an important part of consciousness and an important part of our evolution as a species to become aware of this talent that we have, this additional perception, and we got to stop hiding it and bring it out into the open and discuss it. And that's what I'm doing here. So, okay, let's move on. Well, the point I'm making here, as you can tell, is that peak meditation and our creative inspirations are crucial. I've come to know that these peak meditation experiences and the attendant creative inspirations I mentioned, like in the dream technique, are crucial to the evolution of our consciousness. And while we're in this physical conscious reality to evolve our consciousness toward love and the development of our own creativity, creativity seems to be important, and that doesn't mean that you have to be able to paint the picture, write the book, or build the company. There's lots of ways to be creative in your everyday life. A new way to chop that onion, or to make a sandwich, or just all kinds of small things, but always evolving ways to do things or be in a creative way or a creative sense is just part of the evolution of consciousness. So I think it's so important. Let me repeat I believe our primary purpose in this world is to evolve toward love and creativity. PMEs help us toward these two objectives. They can lead also to awakening and enlightenment. So there is a roadblock or roadblocks, and along the way, they point out our fears to us, and they also point out our inflexible beliefs, and we have to be able to navigate those inflexible beliefs or those things that we're afraid of. We have to be able to get past those, and there's ways to do that. We can go in and program those out, and I talk about those in other teachings. We're not going to address that in this series, but we can continue to grow our ability toward having these if we don't have these. First, by eliminating fears and beliefs that no longer serve us well. Things that we were told as children or something that have carried through with us in life that just aren't true for us. And yet we accepted them because we heard them from our parents, for example, and they would never lie to us, of course, but they didn't know any better. So PMEs and creative inspirations help us remove these fears and roadblocks to see a more perfect and beautiful, surreal reality. So we may be able to have some PMEs at a level, and then we see, oh, we have some fear here or there, and then we come upon that, and we begin to negotiate with it and deal with it. And so it's a wonderful path, and it's an exciting path. So let's move on. Okay. I mentioned earlier that I was going to attempt to put together some categories for these PMEs that I've had in my experience. So it makes more sense to you as to why we might have these experiences. So I've kind of put together these few categories. I call it the space and tunnel travel group, and the energy body is a thing group, and fear training, past and between life experiences and experiences with other forms of consciousness, and bridging experiences, my truths become my worldview type thing. And at the end, perhaps I can share some of my worldview with you. And just a note of, or as a reminder here, I don't expect anybody to believe what I'm telling them. In fact, just the opposite. I want you to have your own experiences. Borrow as much as you like from my experiences as a guideline, as a post. But there are no two souls that travel through this world that have the same path. Your experiences will be different than mine. There's almost 8 billion of us, or maybe there is 8 billion of us now on this planet, and I guarantee you each one of us has a different path. So it's not a matter of just listening to what I say and say, oh, I have to be able to do that. It may or may not be true for you. So you have to get in a mode that you can have the experience and then see what happens and learn. It's all about learning. So space and tunnel travel, just quickly, after I went through the great downturn and the subsequent cleansing, Vajrasattva cleansing, boy, my first meditations just early on just began to take a different form. I saw a spot that would go across my third eye, and it was just so minute. It was hard to see. But the more I focused on it, the more it would open up to become a tunnel. In the beginning, it was primarily a light tunnel. I'd get sucked into it. And then I found with my consciousness, I could direct it forward. This tunnel would be filled with light. It could be white light, most often was, but it also changed colors. just a rainbow of colors over time. And often I'd feel a presence of other souls there, but I was traveling so fast. As I would go through this tunnel, I mean, it was just seemed like the speed of light was my travel. Eventually, those morphed into being in translucent tunnels, going, or I'd call them wormholes, out into space, and and it would be like I would take a train. I would go through one tunnel and get one place in space, and then connect with another tunnel, and then another tunnel or another wormhole. It was pretty fascinating. Ultimately, I got so I didn't need a tunnel. I was out of body in space and could almost go there at will. During this time, too, I really discovered my energy body, and that the energy body is a thing. And I'm going to direct you again. I've done a whole blog on the energy body. Search that out. I think you're going to find that fascinating. But I'll include some energy body experiences I've had. Fear training. I mentioned earlier that along the way, even though I started having these experiences, I would encounter some fears that were dormant in me that I didn't know existed. Or beliefs. And so I received some absolute fear PMEs that I had to deal with. And they were tests. I had to pass those tests. And I found this fascinating that we were being tested, or that I was being tested in order to get to higher levels. And then I had past and between life experiences and experiences with other forms of consciousness. And then ultimately bridging all of these things together to create a bigger worldview. And I'll share some of that with you as we finish up the whole series. Okay, let's move on. I'm going to come back and touch on the dream technique for just a moment. My paranormal experiences began to subside when I developed this dream technique in my early 20s. So I actually kind of became very lopsided in in the way I was applying my consciousness. It was like 24/7 I was involved in building companies for decades. And I use this dream technique in order to access higher fields of consciousness, to develop all kinds of things that were creative and solve problems. And it was just an enormous help to me. But what I really came to understand later in my life is that I had abdicated my spiritual growth, my balanced evolution of development, if you will, by just staying with the dream technique and being in the physical conscious reality of building companies. And I was having taking such immense pleasure helping people and employing people and all of this, that I kind of neglected myself because I wasn't exploring myself spiritually. It was all about what I could do with the company, and it would be incorrect to say that I didn't enjoy the benefits from the companies, the success that came with it, and all of that. So I spent, I would say, for the first decade or maybe 2 decades after I developed the dream technique in my early 20s, I didn't really have any PMEs that were anything other than business related. But all that returned in my started return after the Vajrasattva healing in my in my 50s, mid to late 50s. Although I did have, kind of from my mid 40s on, I did have some experiences. They were infrequent, and I'm gonna talk about one of those today to show you what kind or the nature of those experiences versus the kinds of experience I had post the Vajrasattva cleansing. So the other thing I would say here, it was kind of the dawn of my awakening when I finally had the great downturn, and began to that I went through the Vajrasattva cleansing, and I began to make my way back, and not just back. I was awakened. Those episodes indicated to me that I had spent the last 30 years in a very lopsided relationship with my consciousness and the way I was using it. I didn't use it for spiritual growth. I was using it just in the physical reality and the benefits, the competition that I enjoyed so much, the acquisition of companies and things. The wealth was nice, but it wasn't my primary goal. I just enjoyed creating so much. But that all gave way with the great downturn. And then with the advent of the Vajrasattva awakening, I came to realize that I had neglected my spiritual growth in a really big way. And I paid the price for it. And in fact, I don't know that I paid a price. I think perhaps I had planned it from a previous life to go through this experience so that it would be more impactful. The pain and suffering is always the greatest teacher. And I had a good deal of it associated with this whole experience. And I can't say it was enjoyable, but I can say the benefits of it were beyond my expectation. I didn't think there would be any benefits to it. I never thought I would get through that downturn period. And it's been the gift that just keeps giving. So, okay, let's move on. Okay, what I want to do here is share with you a story, and I mentioned I was going to do this, to tell you or explain to you kind of what my PMEs, even though they were infrequent, but what they were like. They were kind of just one category, and that was sort of helping others or being helped by others. And so that's a general characterization. They didn't have the expansiveness as the ones that came later, but this one's called Mom Visits, and it happened on a gloomy day. It was 4 years after my mother died. I was traveling from Cleveland to New York for a meeting with some Wall Street bankers. I was 44 and living in Akron at the time with my wife and two baby boys. And a torrential rainstorm was pounding at LaGuardia Airport when I arrived at 7:30 in the morning, and there wasn't a cab to be found. So a man approached me and offered me a limo ride into the city, and I accepted. I normally wouldn't take a limo, but in this case it was necessary. As we exited the airport, my mom materialized in a seat that was facing directly across from me. So it was a two-seated limo, and the seats were opposing. She appeared to me as a white light, and with considerable detail, however, and looked about the age she was when she died. And the experience felt quite natural for me, as it wasn't the first time I had been visited by someone who had passed on. In fact, it happened with some frequency earlier in my life when I was a child, and I was delighted to see her. So it was even more rewarding. Though we talked throughout the 30-minute ride into the city, the only part of the conversation I recall is when she had come, I asking her why she had come. And she said very clearly, "They need your help." I asked, I felt like some dying or something was involved here, and I asked if I was dying, and she said no. Then I asked what she needed my help with, but I didn't get a response. And I felt that death, as I mentioned, was certainly involved somehow. And I was concerned because she hadn't been clear to me about what the reason for her visit was. And I couldn't rule out my own death at that time. So I got into the city, and I was at Wall Street and had my first meeting scheduled. And I stepped out of the limousine, and the day was filled with meetings, and I promptly forgot about what had happened. I mean, it just totally went out of my mind. It was strange, but for the next 14 hours, I never gave one thought. I didn't even recall the experience. Let's move on to the next slide, and I'll continue telling you this story. When I got home around 10 o'clock that night, my wife, who was an early riser at the time because of course, two young boys, was asleep. And I went into the nursery to pick up my young sons and hold them in the rocking chair while they slept, which was my habit when I arrived home from a trip when I hadn't been able to really see them or be with them during the day. As I held one of them in the faintly lit nursery, my mom reappeared. And this time with several deceased family members, all of whom I had known in childhood. The visit was deliberate and conversational and gave me plenty of time to recognize grandparents and aunts and uncles and other relatives, all of who were animated but quiet. So my mom stood there with them and then stepped forward from the group, and she did all the talking. And she reiterated that they need your help, and again stated that the visit was not related to my death. And then they all left. It was a brief and beautiful gathering, and I wanted it to continue, but it was clear that this was about business, and reunions would have to wait. Then the memory of the experience from that morning came flooding back for the first time since I left the limo, and very likely because I was in a loving, receptive mood, holding one of my babies in my arms in the nursery, a room we had designed ourselves, complete with a beautiful carousel for the boys to play on. Actually, it was the perfect sanctuary for our brief family reunion. I felt less nervous about this visit, I think because of all of these things. And the fact that my mom was accompanied by other loving relatives relieved concerns about my own death, but also signified 2 visits in one day, and the fact that it was she brought along all of the family members, that it must be family related and there must be urgency to this whole episode. So that was my takeaway. Okay, let's move on. Well, after a few days later, with my wife, Melissa, along with our boys and our nanny, we got on a plane in Ohio and began to fly to California to visit my sister, Joanne, her daughter and grandchildren, who are now living with her. And we had other family members out there, but primarily to spend time with them. I had to sit in a row behind everyone because there weren't enough seats for us all to sit together, of course. And I began to feel sleepy. And it was in that kind of twilight time between when wake and sleep overcomes you, when I heard a voice whisper, "Joanne is dying." But I heard nothing more. However, that was very clear and succinct. So now it made sense. Mom's visit was about Joanne. Well, Joanne had been sick with many different ailments over the last few years. She did not know she was dying. No one did. And I didn't know how I was supposed to help. I didn't tell anyone about the whispered message. I just tried to internalize it, but it just didn't make sense to me at that moment. So 2 days after we arrived, Joanne and her daughter Corey went to a scheduled meeting with an oncologist in Sacramento, about 60 miles away from where we were. And this doctor had run some tests trying to diagnose the disparate ailments that Joanne had been experiencing. And of course, cancer was a possibility. I went along, but the doctor preferred to speak to only Joanne and Corey. He told Joanne that she had cancer, that he'd give her that diagnosis that day, but that she had up to 7 years to live. I knew after Joanne told me that because of Mom's visit that Joanne was dying and she would be gone soon. It just had to be the reason for all the urgency. But how on earth could I relate this to Joanne and the rest of the family? And that's what I had to deal with next. Okay, let's move on. Well, I soon began to see that Joanne was physically much sicker than I had noticed before. And she was fighting to hang on because Corey and her kids who lived with Joanne had nowhere to go. Corey's ex-husband was out of work most of the time and wasn't making child support payments. He and Corey had a significant overdue tax bill, and he could not work. He could only work for cash, and he was a bricklayer, and or the IRS would guarantee his wages. So it was a really critical situation for Corey and her children, who had nothing other than what Joanne provided for them as a real estate broker. And due to her illness, Joanne hadn't worked for some time, and the situation had become dire. She was working, but it was just hit and miss. She couldn't really. She just didn't have the energy to stay engaged all the time. Fortunately, the house was paid for, so there was no mortgage to contend with. As it happened, I owned the house they lived in. Joanne had asked me to buy it for her and was going to buy it for me when she saved the money for a down payment, which seemed like it would only be months away when we did the transaction. But the next night, Joanne and I found ourselves alone for a couple of hours. And I told her about the visits from Mom and the other family members. It just seemed like the right time to do that. Then I heard myself say something, say this actually, it's time to let go. I will take care of Corey and the kids. You don't have to worry about that any longer. To this day, I have no idea where those words came from. I was happy, really happy they came. I knew this was the help Mom was asking for. Joanne visibly softened, and I could see that she began to let go in that moment. It was just that fast. She ended up dying 2 days later. So I was grateful to Mom for her intervention so Joanne could let go and not suffer any longer. And Corey stayed in the house with the kids for over another decade, and I was happy that I could provide that financial support they needed so the kids could get a good start in life, and it worked out fine. Let's move on. So here's my interpretation of the entire experience. It had a surreal aspect to it. I was in the company of deceased family members, of course, who'd passed away, both my mom and my extended family. I was given information no one else had access to, specifically that Joanne was dying. So this is an example of an archetypical PME. While I wasn't in a meditative state, the experience occurred in the being state, which is a state of spiritual gratitude. And I was awake and receptive, and I was in that because the family had come to me. I had this glow about me during that whole visit, but it was because of Mom's visit and the extended family's visit to me in Ohio. I knew there was a bigger, something bigger afoot, and there was this just feeling of love and gratitude for being invited in, even though I didn't know what I was being invited in for. And because of the information or the situation, I was given information in a timely way that enabled me to act and provide help that Mom urged me to offer, all in real time. In the final analysis, I think I was asked, even though I was a younger brother by 9 years, my sister looked up to me, and Joanne would believe the story of my mother's visits and take comfort in that message that it was time for her to let go, and it was coming from Mom, and it was coming from the whole family, and she accepted that. Just didn't even There was just no resistance to that at all when I told it to her. And another reason was I could provide the help for her daughter's family, and the concern that she had was mitigated, and by taking over that responsibility, that just eliminated her prolonged suffering, and that was preventing her from passing. So existence consciousness and Mom, I knew would be grateful for the opportunity, that I would be grateful for the opportunity to be of service and to learn from the experience. And they were right. I was grateful, and it was a beautiful thing. And boy, I would do that all over again. And it still toggles in my heart that I was able to do that. Let's move on. Okay, so the next episode, we're going to explore space and tunneling and tunnel travel and wormhole travel and those things I talked about earlier, and what I found their purpose to be for me at the time. So that'll be in part 2. So we'll continue on with an exploration of these PMEs and what was learned. I hope you enjoyed this this video today, and that you may have gathered something or learned something from it. And that's the whole purpose for watching these things. So if you love this video, I'd ask you to please subscribe and just hit that red button and get on board with us. At least you'll know when we'll release new episodes that you might like. And don't forget to like and share comments on this video if you can bring yourself to do that. I would really greatly appreciate it. You can follow me on social media. I have all the tabs on my website you can click. And check out any videos I've recommended in this blog that I was talking about, like the dream technique and the energy body's a real thing. I think those are going to be very helpful to you, and I've given you a little context in which, or content here to sort of support those things that you can relate to now. So I normally post videos every Monday and sometimes more often, so stay tuned. And you can visit our website, peakmeditationexperiences.com. Again, Peak Mediation Experiences, plural.com. And I have a lot of content posted there in the PME library. I have a course you might be interested in taking. It's free. Just register. If you have a question for me, schedule a free 30-minute Zoom call with me. I'd love to meet you. Just send me an email now and we'll get it scheduled up. I have a scheduling board. Actually, you can just go right to the website and schedule an appointment. You don't even need to call me or send me an email if you want to schedule an appointment. If you have a question, however, and you'd like just an email answer to some question that you have, send it to me at Frank at Peak Meditation Experiences, and I'll give you an answer. Typically, I respond to my emails within 24 to 48 hours. because I find that questions are often kind of urgent for people to get answered. Not always, even if it's just a curiosity question. I'd be delighted to hear from you. You can buy my book also by just going to the website. There's a button on there, and you can learn more about the book and what it's all about. Thank you. Keep your eyes open for part 2 of this series. We'll see you next time.